Wir gucken uns jetzt an. The edgiest and most obscure Fashion Designers. Ich weiß schon, welche Designer es sind. Ich will jetzt im Chat wissen oder in den Kommentaren wissen, welche sind die verrücktesten Fashion Designer und die verrücktesten, die ihr feiert.
Sometime in the early 2010s, this diagram was posted to the internet and has since become
Dieses Diagram lebt rent-free in meinem Kopf. Hier, ihr seht Aces und so, und am Ende, nee. Ey, das ist so das Falsche. Das ist das Falsche, das ist einfach das Falsche. Bro, wenn du das machst, dann machst du schon das Richtige. So, hier, Streetwear, APC, Acne, Burberry, London, Luxury Brands, Bagged of Goodman, Lavin, Brioni, Loro Piana, Undercover, The Antwerp Sick, Rick Owens, Number 9, Boris Bijan Sabiri, 90s Helmut Lang. Aber das ist so, die Version kenne ich. Ja, gibt's mehrere, aber ich kenne die Version. Die Version ist so die ich kenne von über die Jahre. Aber ja, klar, dass Leute dann noch eigene Versionen machen, makes sense. Aber das ist so für mich die official Version. Doch, das ist die. Die untere. Die ist für mich nur unbekannt.
Within the fashion community. This image depicts an altered version of the 9 Circles of Hell from Dante Alighieri's 14th century epic poem, Divine Comedy, where each level is instead annotated with different brands or designers. The deeper you venture, the more obscure they get. The first 7 circles mainly consist of mainstream or very entry-level fashion, but once you cross into the 8th circle, things start to get very niche very quickly. At this point, many self-described fashion
Das ist so, wie man auch die meisten halt durch Mode gehen, ist ja auch verständlich. Du fängst erstmal irgendwo im Mainstream an, gehst da langsam durch und dann boom. Und wenn du drin bist, bist du drin und es geht so schnell und es wird so schnell weird für andere Leute. Weil wenn du angekommen bist bei Rick, Avantgarde und so weiter und so fort, dann gibt es so einen Satz von A$AP Rocky. My money getting longer, my clothes getting weirder. Der Type Beat. Und immer teurer. Ja, weil du in so einem Loop bist und du merkst, wie tief das wirklich geht. Kann auch sein, dass du irgendwo stehen bleibst und aber trotzdem das Ende schon gesehen hast. So der Type Beat. Aber auf jeden Fall bist du aware von dem Ende. Und wenn du halt in diesem Mainstream-Kosmos bist, dann weißt du gar nicht, wie tief das noch geht und was für eine Spirale das noch nehmen kann.
Start to see brands and designers that they've never heard of, and this will only increase the further you descend. Eventually, you reach the bottom, and only one designer dwells at this depth of obscurity: Carol Christian Poell. Despite lacking certain...
Ja, ihr wisst, einer aus der Dachregion, Österreicher, seine Familie sind schon immer in diesem Lederhandwerk gewesen und er ist absolut ein Spezialist da drin. Sitzt jetzt aber in Mailand.
And being outdated a decade after its creation, many would agree that Carol Christian Poell still deserves his place at the bottom of the fashion inferno. He is the quintessential avant-garde designer and is known for his uncompromising and extremely experimental design.
Aber nicht nur Designs bei Carol Christian Poell, auch die Art und Weise, wie er seine Klamotten präsentiert. Er ist einer der Designer, der sagt, when you're ready. Wenn ich eine Show machen möchte und was zu sagen habe, mache ich eine Show. Er hat auch diese Floating Show gemacht, eine legendäre Show, wo die eingeladenen Gäste an einen Ort gebracht worden sind und die erstmal nicht wussten, was abgeht. Die sind da angekommen und denken so, okay, hier ist ein Fluss, was geht ab? One Stream, Downstream. Und die Models flossen durch diesen See. That's crazy. Falls ihr das kennt, hier, ich zeig's euch. So, ihr müsst euch vorstellen, wie crazy ist das? Ihr entdeckt die Kleidung so erkennt ihr, so. Broski hat einfach das Game gechanged. Das war seine Show. Okay, bevor hier diese ganze Theatralik in dieses Mode-Game kam, hat er das schon gemacht. Und wann kam die Kollektion? 2003 müsste es gewesen sein. Carol Christian Poell, absolute schon Legende.
Which incorporate exceptional tailoring and artisanal techniques. He has built a reputation of shrouded mystery that many celebrities could only dream of replicating, and mastered a level of privacy that would make Frank Ocean look like a lifestyle vlogger. There are only a few published interviews with Poell and only a handful of photos of him on the internet.
Vor allem, was auch Carol Christian Poell für mich absolut krass macht, ist die Art und Weise, wie er seine Produkte verkauft. Er hat es geschafft, Stores zu schaffen, die nur eine Brand verkaufen. Und das ist seine.
None of which are confirmed to actually be him. This alleged picture of him looks eerily similar to this man I often see in my dreams, so I've decided to wojackify him for the sake of this video. He is currently based in Milan's Naviglio district and only comes out with products when he feels like it, completely disregarding the spring, summer, autumn, winter release format that the rest of the industry strictly adheres to. Karl Christian Poell was born in 1966 into a family of leather makers in Linz, Austria. By the age of 15, he was picking up his family's craft while also beginning to make garments due to the influence of his stepfather, who worked in a clothing factory. He would go on to study tailoring in Vienna and then later enroll at Milan's Domus Academy, where he would receive his master's in fashion design. This is where he established CCP SRL in partnership with Sergio Simone in 1995. In the same year, Poell released his first collection called the Unintended Collection, which only consisted of a jacket, a shirt.
Wenn ich mich richtig erinnere, ist halt auch einer der, jetzt guck mal, was für eine Lore kommt, ist der Lederlieferant für diese Brands, die auch so, wo CCP zugehört hat und so weiter und so fort, für diese sehr Nischen-Brands, Greedy gewesen. Greedy war der Lederfabrikant, die Ledermanufaktur oder Lieferant, wie man es auch sagen möchte. Und jetzt machen die einfach eigene Sachen, weil die sagen so, ey Bro, we can do that ourselves as well.
Pair of trousers. The following season, he released his first full collection titled
Ich musste gerade denken, weil ich habe hier meine Greedy Bag. Ja?
The first intended collection. Despite coming up with the most uninspiring names for these releases, this collection was received positively, including by the then creative director of Chanel, Karl Lagerfeld, who would later describe Poell as a marvelous man and say how he'd bought and worn many CCP clothes.
Karl, auch wenn man den meistens gesehen hat in so Anzügen und so weiter und so fort, muss man auch ehrlich Respekt geben, weil der war auch sehr tief in diesem ganzen Avantgarde-Ding drin. Ringe, Chrome Hearts, voll, komplett. Ketten auch. CCP am Rocken und halt Dior von Eddie Simon am Rocken. Und wisst ihr, ich glaube, ihr checkt nicht, diese CCP-Law geht so tief. Jeder von uns hat diesen Mann über seine Kindheit gekannt, gesehen, wahrgenommen, aber wir haben nicht gesehen, dass er die ganze Zeit einfach CCP am Rocken ist. Wir waren noch nicht so weit.
Poell became known as the most researched designer in fashion, which largely referred to his process of experimentation and meticulous clothing production techniques. For example, for the AM2590 titanium arthrosic gloves, Poell inserted each individual zipper tooth one by one. This would seem extremely unnecessary to nearly everyone, including most designers. Still, this sort of masochistic approach to garment construction is what would earn Poell such a good reputation within the fashion community. In 1999, Poell released his first attempt at women's clothing. This collection was initially intended for men, but he started to feel like these recent designs weren't cohesive with previous CCP menswear collections. The most iconic moment in Poell's career would take place on the Naviglio Grande Canal in Milan during the sweltering Italian summer of 2003.
Jetzt kommt's.
The press, fashion enthusiasts, and the general public gathered on a bridge without any idea of what this fashion show would entail. Poell just told them to congregate there. After some time, they started to notice individual items of clothing floating down the canal, which was then followed by models who resembled corpses.
That's crazy.
Wearing full CCP. Despite the clothing in this collection being somewhat tame compared to later releases from Poell, this show became legendary for not just his career but in fashion as a whole, and is a quintessential example of anti-fashion. Titled Mainstream Downstream, this performative presentation of clothes was Poell's way of commenting on the current state of the fashion industry. Mainstream fashion functions as a mechanism fueled by trends to pump out clothes for the masses to wear. This whole system is orchestrated
Bro, einfach Bernard Arnault kriegt Strays, einfach so.
by the industry as a means to an end, with the end being a ton of money. Poell also rejects the focus on people by the fashion industry, which is likely due to that also being used as a tactic to push mass consumption of clothes. When people see their favourite celebrities or models wearing certain garments, they are far more likely to purchase those items.
Ja, und da gibt's halt einfach ein paar Brands, die sagen, fuck your reach, fuck who you are. Wenn du Klamotten haben willst, go buy it. Es gibt kein Seeding.
And fashion brands are very aware of this. This likely played into his choice to use models presented as corpses in this show, as it subverts the industry norm of trying to sell an idealized image of a person that the audience could theoretically become if they just buy into the brand. For many people, this unconventional and macabre fashion show alone would already put Poell at the top of their edgy motherfucker list. Well, you're all in for a treat because it's only ramping up from here on out. In 2010, CCP released two of their most famous collections, which were made to oppose each other. Self-edge consisted of clothes that were made with salvaged fabric, with all the seams of these clothes being glued together. This method of construction takes quadruple the amount of fabric usually needed to construct a normal garment. As a result, the clothes from this series are notoriously rigid and sturdy. This often restricts the wearer's movement
Getting sturdy, yeah?
and in some cases inflicts pain. Juxtaposing this was the Dead End series.
Ja, und die Hose rippt ja auch oft. Fehlinfo, ausstellen, okay, correct us. Was hat er denn gesagt? Warte, habe ich was verpasst?
Consisted of clothes that were made with salvaged fabric, with
okay, ja.
all the seams of these clothes being glued together.
Weil Salvage ist, warte mal, wenn ihr seht, Salvage Denim, da ist die Naht, sieht so aus. Hier, wegen dem Part. Und bei dem Video, wenn ihr jetzt seht, deswegen hat er das gesagt.
That were made with
Ich besitze keine Jeans, deswegen habe ich auch keine Salvage.
Salvaged fabric, with all the seams of these clothes being glued together. This method of construction takes quadruple the amount of fabric usually needed to construct a normal garment. As a result, the clothes from this series are notoriously rigid and sturdy. This often restricts the wearer's movement and in some cases inflicts pain. Juxtaposing this was the Dead End
die weiß ich, wer hat mir das gesagt, dass die Pants halt oft rippt.
Series. The clothes in this collection were characterized by seams only being held together by tape and light chain stitching. This makes the garments look like they could easily pull themselves apart, and surprise, surprise, that is exactly what these garments have a reputation for doing.
Alright.
This quote from one of the few interviews with Poell gives us a bit of insight into why he would create clothes like this. I do not think of dress as a complement to the body, rather I seek to annul the body. Actually, I consider it only a volume and a three-dimensional form. Simply put, Poell doesn't give a fuck about the people wearing his clothes.
Go buy another one. If it rips, go buy another one.
He is purely focused on creating individual garments with artisanal techniques, and everything else, including durability and comfort, is completely disregarded. The garment's existence and purpose is above serving the user. The clothes don't fall apart because they were made poorly, they fall apart because that is the garment's response to you wearing it. 99% of people would definitely see this as a scam, but ultimately this is what you're signing up for when you buy CCP products.
You see the prices? Ain't no cheap thing.
And considering how ridiculously niche this brand is, I doubt anyone is blindly buying into this fashion label. Each item from CCP is meant to be a standard.
Aber ich habe gehört, die Lederjacken, die Boots, unzerstörbar. Das heißt, für mich ist auch, ich sage ja schon seit Jahren, auf meiner Top-List ist so Tonal-Boots oder sowas. Top-List.
Thing. As a designer, Poell's focus is not on creating an overall look, style, or coherence between his clothes. Yes, you can argue that it's visually obvious when you're looking at a CCP garment, so this brand must have style in some form. However, I think this is just a byproduct of Poell's artisanal side, as he is obsessed with meticulous technique, unconventional materials, and outlandish experimentation, and that is what makes up the brand's DNA. To illustrate this better, let's compare CCP to the work of Rick Owens, who is also known for being controversial and being an outsider of sorts in the context of the fashion industry. Both designers make divisive
Was haben die mit Björn gemacht, ja?
But Rick Owens' pieces are designed to be worn styled with other Rick Owens garments. Yes, many people do incorporate his clothes into outfits mixed with other brands, but the general consensus is that these garments look better when styled with more, if not full Rick. CCP is not trying to sell you a lifestyle, which is generally what most brands, even outside of fashion, do to gain loyal customers. This is an example of how CCP embodies anti-fashion even through how they do business. The work speaks for itself. He doesn't need to obey the unwritten rules of running a clothing business.
Yup, der Broski verkauft in Mono-Stores.
For the next portion of the video, I'm going to go through CCP's most grotesque and weird pieces. In true YouTube slop content fashion, I've decided to organise them into a tier list. Just to clarify, these are ranked by how weird and controversial they are and not by which I think is the best or coolest. In D tier, we have the fake pregnant bag. This one is just a bit weird and there's
Guck mal, die Bag kenne ich nicht mal. Die ist krass.
much to say about it. It makes you look pregnant. In C tier, we have the human hair tie. Imagine growing your hair out for years to find out it ended up on the chest of some minted CSM student. The supplier who sourced the hair for Poell must be reliable because the next two entries are the human hair knit pullover and the human hair sleeveless jacket. The idea of being wrapped in some random person's hair is just slightly odd to me, but each their own, I guess.
Next. Also als Krawatte weiß nicht, aber als Sweater und als Mantel finde ich krass.
Have the bag made of a pig in its entirety.
Ich hätte gesagt, das ist so mit das Weirdeste, was ich von CCP kenne. So, es gibt auch dieses Mythos, dass er angeblich das Tier halt im Ganzen umgebaut hat sozusagen. Also, dass das genau so war und nicht nachkonstruiert. Wenn ich check, was ich meine.
I don't think that this one is that ridiculous. Taxidermy isn't that much of a taboo, but people online seem to think this bag is quite controversial. So I'm just trying to account for my own bias, I guess. This piece comments on the fashion industry's use of animal products and makes a good point. If you're okay with wearing leather products, then you should be fine with this bag. B tier, we have the object-dyed leather encased horse. This is pretty much the same as the pig bag, just slightly more extreme. I think this was an installation for a showroom, but I am not completely sure, so take that with a grain of salt. Next, we have jewelry.
Ja, aber Leute glauben, er hat das halt gekillt, also töten lassen und das war die Form.
Made with human teeth. This is just yucky. Like, whose teeth are these? Alright, time to ramp things up a bit. In A tier, we have the bull's blood dyed pigskin trousers. Poell said he did this to bring life back to the leather. Ironically, these garments would end up rotting due to the use of blood. Next, we have this knitted pullover, which at a glance doesn't seem very strange until you find out that it's made of pig intestines. And finally, in S tier, we have this fencing jacket. You'll notice that the leather has this strange veining effect. This was
so, ja, das kenne ich auch. Das hat er aber, glaube ich, bei mehreren Produkten gemacht.
By injecting.
Spritzt der, ja genau, wie er es jetzt sagt, der spritzt da, glaube ich, was in das Leder, um dann die Venen rausholen.
Live animal would die before it was slaughtered for the leather. I think Poell took it a bit too far with this one. However, in a world where people don't have to confront the ugly side of the animal-based products they consume, this jacket proudly shows the suffering of the animal instead of just sweeping it under the rug. Yeah, Poell really shouldn't have done this, but if this does piss you off, then it does raise the question.
Crazy.
Why do you only care when the animal's suffering is shown to you? I mean, shit like this exists, which is what puts this on your plate. Something I haven't seen anyone talk about regarding the work of Carl Christian Poell is that it can often come across as quite contradictory. I am not referring.
Das Ding ist, Designer, desto mehr du die reden hörst, desto mehr widersprechen die sich. Ich weiß nicht, ich frage mich oft, wenn ich darüber nachdenke, ob das ein humanes Ding ist, also dass die das menschlich macht sozusagen, oder dass das menschlich ist, oder Designer einfach keine Stringenz in ihren Gedanken, ihre Konzepten und so weiter und so fort haben.
To the interpretation of his work focuses on dichotomies. If you want to learn more about that, you should watch this video by Carsten Craning where he discusses this in depth. It's a great video and a fly even hovers over its head towards the end, which is very on brand for someone talking about archive fashion.
Archive fashion, the tribe of smelly garment wear.
Wollte ich gerade sagen, will er damit sagen, dass er stinkt oder was?
The contradiction I'm referring to is mainly in the explanations behind the work of CCP. An example of this would be how his first women's collection came about after he converted design work from a collection initially intended for men. He said he did this because it wasn't cohesive with his previous menswear collections. However, in the same interview, he also claimed that his focus with this collection was on the garment individually and would also over-dramatically call this process the trilogy. This refers to the whole thing of him focusing on each garment as an individual thing and completely disregarding everything else, including overall looks and styles. If that was his process of designing clothes, then why did he care that it wasn't cohesive with previous collections? I find it interesting that Poell has only discussed this publicly once in a contradictory manner, yet it has become a defining characteristic of CCP.
Das sind hier Boots in schwarz, würde ich die gerne haben.
In the same interview, he goes on to explain how he doesn't consider the body when creating clothes and in fact wishes to annul it. If he sought to annul the body, then would that not include gender too? So what's the point of converting the collection into specifically a woman's one if he supposedly
ich weiß, die sind teuer, aber eines Tages
to invalidate the body anyway? The points I'm making kind of make it sound like I'm somehow angry that CCP started making women's clothing. That is not the case. Don't worry, girlies, you go on and wear your blood-covered pigskin trousers. Again, I just find it interesting that people define Poell's whole body of work based on these few public explanations, even though he seems to contradict them in the same interviews. Maybe all this conceptual stuff is just bullshit he made up to enable his obsession with grotesque.
Ich sag ehrlich, also ich glaube jetzt nicht, dass das bei Kaiio Christian Poell so ist, aber ich glaube, dass das bei vielen Leuten so ist.
Experimentation and artisanal techniques. It could all just be an ironic joke. I mean, it's not like he hasn't made ironic products before, and I think it would be strangely poetic that the edgiest and most obscure fashion designer was taking the piss out of his audience via the products this whole time. I'm not saying I actually believe his theory at all, but still, this guy has deliberately made clothes so fragile that they are known for falling apart after very little wear, while also creating jackets so sturdy that they hurt the wearer, or trousers that don't allow you to sit down and force you to learn a new way to walk. Despite this, he adamantly claimed during an interview that he has no intentions of making works of art and that he's a fashion designer focused on, quote, making real clothes with a series of artisan techniques. He is a trained tailor and fashion designer, so he is definitely capable of making comfortable and durable clothing, but actively choosing not to do so can only really be explained through some sort of artistic or conceptual approach. Poell discusses artistic concepts, but he will also turn around and firmly say he is not an artist in the same interview. In so many ways, the contradictions, vagueness, and obscurity of it all make the idea of it all being satire seem like a possibility. I know there are going to be some CCP elitists watching this who are about to comment something like, "You simpleton, these aren't contradictions, you just can't comprehend the duality of blah 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 blah." And yeah, that may be your or someone else's interpretation that you've copied and pasted into your opinion, and great, good for you. But is it too hard to believe that all while you were pretentiously judging other people's fashion choices from atop your object-eyed...
Ich finde aber, der Kaiio Christian Poell, auch wenn er sagt, boah, das soll nicht alles cohesive sein und nicht alles zusammenhängend sein, der hat eine ganz klare Design-Language. Du wirst erkennen, dass ein Kaiio Christian Poell Produkt nicht nur, weil es die Ästhetik ist, sondern, oh, dieses Designelement hat er schon öfters genutzt. Dieses Designelement nutzt er auch immer. Oh, dieses Design... Bro, das macht das Ganze cohesive. Auch wenn er sagt, er will sich auf das einzelne Produkt konzentrieren, das macht das Ganze cohesive. Du hast bestimmte Elemente wieder und wieder verwendet. Du hast einen bestimmten Look geschaffen. Du hast eine bestimmte konzeptuelle Idee und eine Ästhetik in deinem Kopf, ob du willst oder nicht. Und wenn du auch sagst, ich konzentriere mich nur auf das einzelne Stück, wenn du rauszoomst, im Gesamtkonzept, passt das alles zusammen.
In case high horse, you were actually the butt end of a joke made by the very person who sold you your £2,200 overlock vest bag. No matter what Poell decides to release on whatever schedule he likes for whatever price he sees fit, there will always be some edgy motherfucker who's going to buy it.
Oh, jetzt sind nur noch die Leute am roasten, die
most unheard of for any brand, especially in the digital era where brands have to constantly market themselves to stay relevant and get customers. CCP, on the other hand, almost seem like they are trying to drive attention away from them. The official website literally doesn't load and the Instagram page is private. I find it very...
Der hat seine Instagram-Page schon seit Jahren private. Sehe ich die? Weil ich war auf jeden Fall sehr, sehr lange auf der Waitinglist. Ich bin immer noch auf der Waitinglist. 6 meiner Freunde sind nicht auf der Waitinglist.
that Poell does not consider himself to be an artist purely because, according to him, the concepts come as a secondary thing and making real clothes come first. There are a few examples of this being just straight up bullshit, like with the pig intestines sweater. From a purely fashion design focused perspective, what practical use is there for using a material like that, if not for a conceptual purpose? I also personally think that even if the conceptual side of his work is secondary, then that doesn't make him not an artist. Does a painter who makes their own canvases not count as an artist just because the conceptual part of their job comes after the more artisanal process of hand making something purely for its function? Again, I just want to reiterate that I am not trying to claim that irony is the true meaning behind CCP. When we're dealing with the levels of edginess and obscurity that comes with subjects such as Carol Christian.
Also ich sehe Carol eiskalt auch als Künstler. Also es ist eine Form von Kunst. Ob es jetzt Marcel Duchamp Kunst ist oder die Kunst von Pablo Picasso, in dem Raum ist zu definieren. Aber es ist auf jeden Fall eine Art von Kunst. Er hat ein ganz klares Konzept, so es ist Kunst.
I think it's important not to take everything too seriously, especially when there is very little information available about the man and his work. It is just fun to theorize about these sorts of things, and when there are elitists involved, it's also kind of funny to clown on them a bit. Ignoring the conceptual theories, philosophies, and I guess the ethics of some of his clothes, we can all at least agree his design work is unparalleled and his craftsmanship is exceptional. Anyway, if you're tired of disgusting British vocal fry and still want to learn more without having to sift through the 707-page CCP forum on the Style Zeitgeist website, then as I said earlier, I highly recommend checking out this video by Carsten Craning.
Geiles Video, war sehr informativ, ein, zwei Dinge konnte ich auch noch dazu lernen. CCP ist immer noch für mich sowieso ein bisschen ein Mysterium, aber er arbeitet eigentlich genauso subtil, wie er es beschreibt, da ja er selbst behauptet, dass er 100% des Tieres verwerten will, deshalb auch Organe und Haare. Ja, macht Sinn, aber das ist ja ein Konzept, es ist ja eine Idee, es ist eine Weltanschauung, die er dadurch verkörpert. Er macht nicht nur Kleidung in einem handwerklichen Kontext, Kleidung in einem handwerklichen Kontext ist für mich Savile Row. Kleidung, handwerklicher Kontext, sehr klar, sehr, wie die Anzüge machen, sehr traditionell, so weiter und so fort. Aber alleine die Beschreibung, er selbst behauptet, er will 100% des Tieres verwerten, deshalb Organe und Haare und dann die Sachen wie die Drip Shoes, die Pants und so weiter und so fort, die du sogar reißen kann, das ist alles Konzept.